verses 1 through 8. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace.
When I was about into high school, probably maybe into early university, we were quite surprised when a passage from the Bible suddenly appeared on the top 10 of songs for young people. A band called the Birds, recorded a song called Turn, Turn, Turn. For everything, there is a season. And the words of Ecclesiastes 3, 1 to 8 were heard across, literally around the world. I started to say across North America, but around the world. And I suspect that many of the young people who were listening to it and singing along with it had no idea where it came from and said, oh, that's a really neat lyric. And for those of us who have a little bit of Bible knowledge, thought, that's neat, because that's Bible. That's important. We want to talk about this passage this morning, and just by way of beginning, think a little bit about the background. A lot of people don't pay much attention to the book of Ecclesiastes. And sometimes I think it may be because it's a depressing book, much of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go, and why it is depressing. When we open the book and we start looking at it, the writer refers to himself as the teacher. In fact, the name Ecclesiastes actually comes from that idea of teacher, or some of the translations have used the word preacher to identify this person. There's no name as such that is part of that, except that there are a couple of things that are mentioned. Refers to himself as the son of David, and the fact that he's king in Jerusalem, and that he has more wisdom and knowledge than those who preceded him. And so with that basic background, we kind of come with the thought, okay, it seems like this is pointing to Solomon, which is one of the major theories about authorship, and a lot of people think that. So you think about, all of the wisdom that Solomon had, and the insight that he had into many things, and think, okay, there's a profound wisdom in this book. And he sets out, he says, to explore everything under the heavens. Now, the expression that he repeatedly uses through this book is to refer to everything under the sun. And I think we need to get the perspective of the book, and that's why it gets depressing. It's written completely, almost completely, let me qualify that, from an earthly viewpoint. From our perspective. It's interesting to think about, what would your view be like if you spent your life lying on the floor? And it would not be very grand, would it? It would be very limited. There'd be a lot of things in the way. There'd be a lot of very partial views of things. You know, that Ecclesiastes, as Solomon, and we're going to assume Solomon here, as Solomon tries to look at what happens on earth under the sun, he's looking at this very partial view of everything, but he's doing it from our perspective. That's why we can identify and understand, but we also kind of get a sense of why he's so depressed. And so in chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, especially talks about the nature of his search. You know, that he's going to look at things like pleasure, wealth, power, fame, you know, all the, you know, I mean, he's king in Jerusalem. He has these things. And as he goes through the early parts of this book, he does so talking about, you know, what each of these perspectives taught him. And you know that expression that we have, you hear that money can't buy happiness? He says, yeah, that's true. Power, pleasure, all of these things. And so the theme of the book actually is, and he repeats this, older translations use the word vanity. And that doesn't resonate much with people today because we don't use that word very much anymore, but new translations will use a word like meaningless. At one point he'll talk about that it's like trying to chase the wind. And you may remember a time when your children, or maybe when you, as a child, you know, were trying to do that, you know, trying to chase and catch the wind. And you realize that's an exercise in absolute futility. It's meaningless. You can't catch the wind. You can't see the wind. How would you know if you caught it? You know, and you're probably thinking, or some of you are probably thinking about a more scientific thing and saying, well, you know, about air, and we're not going there. But meaningless. It's futile. It's nothing. And so as Solomon has gone through all of these things, he's recorded in this book. And so basically, and I'm just going to run through the verses here real quickly to kind of think about that all the things that happen under the sun. There's birth and death. There's time to plant and time to uproot. You know, it's interesting he doesn't say time to plant and time to harvest. Time to plant, time to uproot, time to kill, time to heal, time to tear down, time to build, time to weep and laugh, mourn and dance, scatter and gather, embrace and refrain from embracing, search and give up, keep, throw away, tear, mend, time to be silent, time to speak, time to love, time to hate, time for war, and a time for peace. You know, you look at that list through those 8 verses, you know, it's like wow. That's like everything that basically that can happen to us is there. It touches our emotions, it touches our activities, it touches the things that happens around us. And so I think based upon what he's saying there, we can maybe draw some thoughts here, is that life is a set of contrasts and opposites. You know, there's good things, there's bad things. There's easy things, there's hard things. You know, there's fun things, pleasurable things, there's things that are very harsh and unenjoyable. And that pendulum swings back and forth, but sometimes you don't know how long it's going to stay at one end or the other. And that's one of the things that's going to really frustrate Solomon, is that then it becomes very paradoxical and puzzling. Life is, and I thought about putting the word here, but I changed my mind and then I'm changing it again. Life is an enigma. It's a puzzle. You just don't know. That some of the things that really trouble him, for example, is that, okay, he's king. He's rich. He can basically do anything he wants to do. And so here he is. He's got all the wealth and all the fame. And then it dawns on him, there's this poor beggar over here sitting in the gutter with nothing. And he and that beggar are both going to die the same death. Now, they're both going to die. There isn't a difference between a royal death and a beggar death. There's just death. And that frustrates him. He's not sure about how that works out. It's a puzzle. And so he realizes that life is very uneven. That there are, it's not a plateau, not a prairie. It's a journey through the mountains, through the severest, harshest countryside, and it's up and it's down and down and down and up and down. It's just, and so unpredictable. You don't know what's happening. I always, when I think about that, I think about many years ago when I was a teenager. I was just absolutely addicted to Mad Magazine. And some of you will, yeah, you're nodding, yeah. And some of the stuff that Don Martin did was really great. I remember this one where there's a family driving in the car. They're in a convertible, and they're on really hilly countryside, and the father says, one of the things I always envision when we're going up and down these hills is if we're going up a hill, I wonder, is there another side to the hill? What happens if there's just a cliff? And we go up the hill. And so as you see the continual frames of the cartoon, that having raised that thought that every time they start going up a hill, the family is getting really more and more nervous because of the possibility, just that thought, that there might be a cliff to go over. And the way Don Martin does it is eventually there is a cliff that they go over. But it's so unpredictable. We just don't know what is going to happen in the next few minutes, through the rest of the day. And so life is frustrating. That really is the picture that Solomon paints of his life. Is that despite all of the things that he has and all the things he's able to do and his great wisdom, he's frustrated. Because under the sun, in other words, on earth, there are no easy answers. That's one of the things that I think we always need to be very careful about. There are people that want to give easy answers. There are no easy answers. We don't understand. We don't know. That life can be difficult and even painful. And so, as he considers all that, he says, it is meaningless. That just human existence, we talk about the rat race. I think if the expression had been around, he would probably have used it. You get up in the morning, you eat, you go to work, you come home, you eat, you go to bed so you can get up in the morning. And that's life. Just over and over and over and over. And so under the sun, he realizes that everybody is the same. the king and the beggar. And that things happen to everyone. You know, that the king doesn't get a special pass. In fact, you think about it. Think about what happened in Solomon's life and all of the difficulties he faced. And as he saw all the problems that his father David faced, that being king was no easier, in fact, maybe harder than being poor. That everybody will have trouble. You know, it's one of those things that sometimes people will say, well, you know, how everything's going, oh, everything's just going great. You know, we like to do that. We like to say that. But we all have difficulties. We all have problems. We all face. And for Solomon, this becomes the bottom line. All will die. You know, under the sun, that we were created to live a certain period of time, and life will end. There's a reason I decided to do this sermon this morning when the kids are out there, because I thought, okay, I don't want to depress them yet, but you know, you just kind of think about, I mean, Ecclesiastes is depressing. One of the things that I often think about is that Solomon, if he's the one that wrote it, is revealing really a very frustrated, depressed view of life. That what happens under the sun, that money, pleasure, wealth, wisdom, power cannot change things. How many times you hear somebody say, well, if only I had this, I would be happy. Wrong. Because once you get that, what happens? You know, it's like going to the store with your kids, right? Say, and kids will do this. Oh, I just can't live if I don't have this. And they get it, and what do? Play with the box. I always like the knowing laugh. Because as soon as we get the one thing, we want the next thing. And so what does Solomon say? The eye is never satisfied with seeing. The ear is never satisfied with hearing. You know, we don't say, oh, that's the most beautiful scene I could ever imagine seeing. Pluck my eyes out. I've seen enough. We usually say something like that when we see some bad stuff, right? See, that's the nature of life under the sun. It is meaningless. What's missing? Well, you know, it's interesting. Solomon works his way all the way through this book and waits to the very, very end of the book to try to answer that. You know, what's missing is God. He says at the very end of the book, the end of the matter, all has been heard, you know, about living under the sun. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole. And some of the older translations have the word duty here. Duty is not in the text. Duty's not there. Duty is something the translators added and may have done a big disservice to everybody, because what Solomon said is, for this is the whole of man. That is what we were created. One of the things that he says, and I've mentioned this many times, but I always think it's really interesting, is that he says that when God created us, he set eternity in our hearts. That he put something in us that craves for something not under the sun. Something that's not part of this life. And so as he answers, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days draw near. And, the evil days actually are age. And I think as we get older, we might come more to agree with him as it becomes a little harder to get out of bed and there are more, creaks and pains. But his point is that we need to start young, to realize that life is meaningless without God. And that there needs to be a balance. See, what does the Bible say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. There needs to be a balance here. We have to live in the physical, but we need to recognize the importance of the spiritual. That God is the only one that can provide meaning and purpose and direction to give the answers for why we're here and where we're going and even who we are. Jesus put it, John 14:1, when he's talking to the disciples before his arrest, he said, don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms, and if it were not so, I would tell you, but I go to prepare a place for you. That his point is that we are not just created for living under the sun. That we were created for eternal fellowship with God. And that's the purpose of our lives, is eternity. And that's why life here is frustrating and empty and meaningless, is because it is incomplete. There's one other thought, that I think about that, with this, is that as you think about the picture that Solomon portrays in Ecclesiastes, and you just hear the pain and the struggle that he's going through. And, we think, man, you're king. You've got all, But inside, you're empty. That's how he got into so much trouble, isn't it? That's how his life ended up as a mess. And how his son became even more of a mess than he was. And you compare that with Jesus in John 16:33. This is one of those passages that Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. Exactly. In this world, you will find futility, frustration, meaninglessness. You'll see circumstances that are difficult. You will face struggles. You will have problems. Your car's going to break down. You're going to cut your finger in the kitchen or at the desk. You're going to lose people who are very close to you. You or somebody close to you may have serious illness. The world has its troubles. But the only way, Jesus says, to have peace is in him. And that peace is going to be inside you, not around you. And that peace is going to change the meaninglessness of the world into the joy of knowing God. Tim's chosen a song for us to close with. And I think the words of this song will be quite meaningful and important for us. And as we're singing, I want to encourage each one here to think about where God is in your life. Is that part of the equation that you have? Or are you just running the rat race? Are you finding the meaninglessness? You're busy, but there's no point to it. I want to encourage you to think about your relationship with God, and if we can help you with that, I invite you to talk. You can talk with me or with one of the other elders. So let's stand and say,